Hi everyone. So I wanted to talk about an important topic today. I mean, all the topics are important, right? But this one is something that people often ask me. Do you ever advise people to actually separate? Do you advise couples ever to separate? And also, someone else had asked, when do you know that it's time to let go? Right? And this is there are two forms of the same question. And I thought that that was a valid question. A lot of people think that because I work with relationships that maybe I always suggest that people should stay together and do their very best to always save the marriage. And that's not the case. I have quite a few times actually in the last several years suggested that my opinion is that there are too many red flags. But I always say take that with a big pot of salt because I'm only seeing a sliver of your life in this particular context, but this is my honest opinion. So I have said that. Sometimes people see it coming. Very rarely, I think a couple of times people have been maybe taken aback by that. But integrity is really important to me, so I try to be very honest, lovingly, gently, but honesty is really important to me. I call it radical honesty. And I think that that's important in any relationship, including a coach client relationship as well, right? Because otherwise, how can you trust another human being if I'm just saying that you should still try even when I don't really believe that? So yes, I have said that before. So I wanted to share a little glimpse into how I think through this. How can we what framework can we use to make that decision? Here's the thing. There are three situations that I think are big red flags. Okay. So I'll first talk about those three. Then if you don't have any of those three, then, which is majority of the time, then I'll talk about the three questions you can ask yourself to try to figure out if it's, if you should stay and keep trying or whether you should maybe think about letting go. Okay. So three situations that I've seen are big red flags is one, of course, domestic violence. Here's the thing with domestic violence. Research shows, okay, that there are two kinds of domestic violence. One is when both partners in a dyad, they sort of rev each other up and they both get escalate one another. And one partner may shove and the other partner hits back. It may be that because one partner is physically bigger, that the impact of their pushing back or shoving or hitting, the impact is larger, but the lead up to it and both of them hitting each other is one kind of domestic violence. The reason we differentiate is because that kind where both partners have trouble with emotion regulation, both partners cross physical boundaries, is actually treatable. The other kind is what we call characterological domestic violence. This is when it's always one partner towards the other. You don't really know what'll set them off. Okay. There is the physical violence escalates every time, and there's control of finances, of the other person's social life, and belittling and all of those things that go along with that. That's called characterological domestic violence, and that is not going to get better. If you are in a relationship where there's characterological domestic violence, where one person is controlling your finances, controlling your social life, meaning this is not the same as your partner is an introvert and doesn't want to come along with a lot of things that you want to do. It's not ideal, but it's fine. This is, they don't let you see people. They try to prevent you from having friends or contact with a neighbor or things like that. Okay. So characterological domestic violence is not going to get better. Okay. The second big red flag that I've seen that often does not get better is severe substance abuse. Okay. Now, I'm not saying substance abuse treatment doesn't work. It is an up and down process, right? And many times, with the state of substance abuse treatment available to us at this time in history, many people have to go through rehabs and detoxes many, many times, and then they are sober for decades. So it could work, but it is going to be a process. It's going to have a lot of ups and downs, and it's something that it needs to be dealt with separately, because the substance abuse itself will cause a lot of escalations and a lot of mood swings and violent outbursts. So yeah, substance abuse, severe substance abuse, needs to be dealt with separately, and you need to step away from that codependence, making excuses for them, and this is the last time they're getting better kind of relationship. They need to get their own treatment, and that needs to happen first before you can even see if the marriage is viable. Okay. The third one, which is a huge red flag, is repeated affairs, active, ongoing affairs. When your partner, or if it's you who's had or is having an affair, if you are having trouble letting go of the affair partner, and you are blaming even that on your spouse, right? So let's say your partner is having an ongoing active affair. They're refusing to let go of that person, and they're blaming you and saying, if it wasn't for you, you drove me to this, and things like that. That's a huge red flag. Okay, so these three red flags, I have a lot of reservations around, because not that it's impossible, but the probability is low that things will get better and stay better. Now, most relationships don't fall under one of those three things. Most divorces don't fall under one of those three things, right? Most divorces and most breakdowns of relationships happen outside of those three things. You may be unhappy, right? So how do you know if you should stay or leave? It's almost like, I feel like things have changed 180 degrees culturally. Like maybe about, I don't know, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, it was shameful to leave, right? It was kind of like, divorce? Now I feel like it's gone to the other side, where it's actually shameful to stay if you're not in love. The definition of marriage and the function of marriage has changed so much in our society, where it used to be that your partner is one of the important relationships in your life, and there was a functional aspect to marriage, and now they are everything, and romance has become the number one factor with which we decide marriage. And there's no right and wrong either way. There are cultures that have it still the other way, and they have functional societies. So there's no right and wrong, but it is a very different perspective, which means that when we're not in love with our partners, even our best friends might be prone to say, oh my gosh, you deserve so much better. You need to feel like you're in love. So the seasons of life ebb and flow, right? So even though marriage in Western society now is focused on romance, the fact is that in our actual relationships, our feelings of being in love will ebb and flow. Ebb and flow is built into our brain and the way it functions. This is not just in your primary relationship with your spouse. This is even in your relationship with your parents and your children. This is in the law of nature. There are seasons to nature. There's an ebb and flow to things. So this is where we come up against the fact that ebb and flow and the feeling of being in love and not feeling in love is part and parcel of the journey when you are with somebody over decades. And yet we rub up against that cultural expectation that we're supposed to be in love. Okay. So that's one thing to watch out for. Because people do talk to me and say, I don't feel in love. I'm not in love with my spouse anymore. As if that was permanent. As if once you fall out of love, that you can never fall back in love. If you have fallen out of love, just like you can fall out of love, you can fall in love, because even that is an ebb and flow. Because I think people get that there is an ebb and flow to life, but when you do fall out of love, I say when, not if, because it will happen. If you're with somebody for decades, it will happen. Trust me. When that happens, it's hard to remember that even that will ebb and flow. Okay? So the first question to ask yourself, right, is, have I done everything to grow? Because I have found nothing that is like marriage that pushes you to grow. Marriage is the best container in the world for growth. It insists on your growth. It will push you to grow. It will rub up against your worst fears and disappointments and hurts. There is nothing like marriage as a fast lane to growth, if you're willing to take that. So the first three red flags that I talked about, I'm not talking about those. If you are in one of those three situations, these three questions will not help you decide. Okay? If you're in one of those first three red flags that I talked about, it's very hard for that marriage to survive. But most of us are not in one of those three situations, and yet divorce rate is almost at 50%, right? So for those of us who are in unhappy marriages where we don't feel satisfied, we don't feel in love, we don't feel connected, we feel irritated, we feel like we're very different people, we have different hobbies and likes and dislikes and personalities, all of that, right? That's majority of marriages that end up, some of them end up in divorce. So for those of you, how do you decide? First question to ask yourself is, have I done everything to grow within this container? Because if you have not, these same growth pains will show up for you in your next relationship. Please hear this, really important. If you have not grown and used this container to become your best self, then these growth edges and growth pains will show up for you in the next relationship. Okay? That's why first-time marriages in the United States, about a 48% chance of divorce. Second marriages, 60%. Third marriages, 70%. Isn't that crazy? Why? Because we take ourselves wherever we go. There are many reasons for this, but the biggest one is because we take our patterns and we think, if I just find a different partner, because I'm perfect, I'm being facetious here, but only partly, right? We all think that we are on the right side and the other person needs to change, and if they don't, then I just need to replace my external circumstance and my partner. So that's a big reason. Another reason, though, is the fact that you often have blended families in second and third marriages, right? And blended families can be harder. Not always, but it's an additional thing to work through. So that's another reason. But the biggest reason is because we haven't figured out our own patterns and we're just trying to run away. And we think, it's like moving to a different city and you think that's going to change your life or your internal world. It might for a short amount of time. Even winning the lottery only has about a 6-month spike in happiness. Then you're back to your baseline. Okay, so external circumstances don't change much our baseline level of happiness, unless obviously there was, famine or war or abuse or discrimination, right? Obviously those things, it will make a big difference, but otherwise unlikely to make a big difference. Okay, so the first question to ask yourself is, have I used this as a container for growth? Now, in our programs, for example, we really go deep on what that looks like. Okay, and there are many things we touch on. For example, have we healed our own triggers from our own past? How do you know something is a trigger for you? You know if something is a trigger when your response is out of proportion to the stimulus. When your response is out of proportion to the stimulus, that's a trigger for you. And we all have them. So have you healed those triggers? Have you, yes, have you healed those triggers, right? I teach something called your unanswerable question. I don't have time to go into all of that, but you need to know what your unanswerable question is and answer that for yourself. If you don't, you will be searching for that answer outside of you until you're in your 90s. It's not a fun search. Let me tell you, I did that for 15 years. Okay, it's not a fun search for you or those involved in that journey. So, what is your unanswerable question? How do you answer it? Have you healed your own triggers? Have you figured out how to have radical, vulnerable honesty in your marriage? Do you know what your purpose is, and do you know how to move towards that and have peak experiences and growth outside of your marriage? So many factors that you need to examine in that first question of, have I done my best to grow within this container? So the first question, like I said, is, have I done everything to grow within this container? Because if you don't, this will show up in every other relationship. And the divorce rate for second and third marriages is only higher than first marriages. Okay? Hi, Huma. Hi, Samara. And that question has many sub parts to it, right? Your own triggers, your unanswerable question, your finding peak experiences and growth and purpose, and your North Star outside of the relationship. So where was I? So that's the first question, okay? I don't have time, like literally I could talk about that one question for 6 weeks, which is what we do in our 90-day course. The first 6 weeks is healing your relationship with yourself and showing up as your fully healed self. Because otherwise, if you run away from the work and instead run to divorce before you do your own growth work, you will always have a question in your mind whether you did the right thing or not. Does that make sense? You don't want to live in regret. That's why you're stuck. If you're like, should I leave? Should I go? Should I leave? Should I go? It's because you are stuck, because it's impossible to know what to do when you haven't cleaned up your side of the street. The second 6 weeks of the course is restoring friendship, trust, and communication. Friendship, trust, and communication in the space between you and the other relationship. So it may be with your partner, but there are people in the course who are working on their relationship with their mom, with their sibling, lots of things. Okay. So the second question to ask yourself is, have I nourished my relationship Or have I been focused only on weeding? Okay, have I watered this plot of land? Imagine that your marriage is a plot of land that's been given to you, and you have to harvest a bounty from this land to be able to feed yourself and your family. If you are only looking for the weeds, which is the problems, and you're constantly weeding your land, which is great, it's important, but you never nourish it, you never feed it, you never put seeds in it, you never water it, it's not going to give you a bounty. It's just impossible, right? That's not how nature works. So that's the second question to ask yourself. Am I nourishing more than I'm weeding? Notice I'm not saying don't weed. I'm saying, are you nourishing more than you're weeding? Does that make sense? I don't want to rush through because very important questions that can literally change the course of someone's life. So I want to make sure that you're being thoughtful. These 3 questions apply in any close relationship. Like I said, in our 90-day program, there are people who are working on their relationship with their mom, with their adult siblings, with their children. We have a physician in her 60s who's working on her relationship with her adult son. No one has a gun to your head. So if you are spending so much time weeding, you won't have time to water it. You will not have time to water it. Whatever you notice and pay attention to will grow. Okay, because it fills what we call our attention span. We have a very limited attention span, which is why we can't multitask, even though we all try to. It's really impossible to multitask, actually. It reduces, like, let's say I'm trying to do 2 things at once. I'm going to do both things half-assed because we have a short attention span. Like, the bandwidth is actually not that big. So in that bandwidth, if you're focusing a lot on the weeds, then you're going to fill your mind with what's wrong. Don't be weeding and watering somebody else's lawn, including your partners. It is not your job to be telling them how they should change their habits, how they should improve this and that. That's a way of you not focusing on your own growth. It's always easy to point out somebody else's mistakes. So, am I watering the relationship? Am I nourishing the relationship at least equally, if not more, than weeding? So, yes, focus on at least equally am I nourishing this plot of land to the weeding. The third question to ask yourself, this third one is something that I'm learning more and more. I'm going into it more and more, and I'm bringing it to my work with my clients more and more too. There's a lot of research that the best way to become the person that we want to be, okay, is to actually ask yourself, like, have a clear vision of this person, right? Again, there's so much research on this that I can't, it would take me weeks to explain, but a gist of it is, imagine yourself in the future, knowing that you're going to change. You are not the person you were 10 years ago, 15 years ago. You're not going to be the same person 10 years from now. But we all think that we're going to be the same. Right? We think that we're all going to be the same. So we make decisions as if our personality is fixed and our spouse's personality is fixed. So to get away from that, to dislodge from that and go into growth mindset, because even if you wanted to, you wouldn't be the same person 10 years from now. And even if you insisted, your spouse is not going to be the same person 10 years from now. It's impossible. Change is constant. So imagine yourself 10 years from now or 3 years from now or whatever, and give that a particular name a particular character, a look, right? And there's a process for doing this, but again, sneak peek. And then ask yourself, what would future me do? That's your third question. What would future me do? So those are the three questions that you can ask yourself that you probably won't find in random self-help books, that I found to be most important to decide whether to stay or to leave. So, quick summarizing, 3 red flags. These 3 red flags likely won't improve. Characterological one-sided domestic violence, severe substance abuse needs to be dealt with separately, and ongoing active affairs where the person is hesitant to let go of the affair partner and is blaming their spouse, saying, you drove me to it. Those 3 situations, unlikely to improve. But most marriages are not in those situations. 90% of divorce is actually not to do with those 3 things. So then how do you decide whether you should stay or leave? Ask yourself these 3 questions. 1, have I done, because marriage is the best container for growth. And if you run away from your own growth, you will still have to face the same issues in the next relationship, in the next relationship, in the next relationship. So have I done everything to become whole myself? Have I healed my triggers? Have I answered my unanswerable question? Have I figured out mapped out my own internal wounds? Have I figured out how to have direct, vulnerable, honest communication? I call it radical honesty, and so many other things, right? We get into this deep in our 90-day program. Ask yourself that question. Very, very important. Second question to ask yourself, am I nourishing the relationship at least as much as I am weeding it? Again, I could talk about this for 2 weeks. And this second question is what we answer in the second half of our 90-day course. I teach you how to do that in 5-minute increments a day. The third question to ask yourself is to remember personality is not fixed. Your identity is not fixed. You're going to be different 10 years from now or even 5 years from now. So will your partner. So ask yourself, what would my future self do? And to even answer that appropriately, you need to go through the process of defining your future self. And there's a process for that. Okay, so if any of you are interested in diving deeper into your own growth, healing, and becoming the best version of yourself, learning how to nourish at least as much as you weed, and also learning how to create a future self that you can move toward, right? You should always be competing with the person that you could become in the next few years. That's the person that you should be looking up to. That's the person you should be moving toward and admiring. That is real growth. And if you're interested in learning how to do any of these things, just comment I'm in the comment section, and one of us will reach out to you and talk to you about how we can help you do that. So that's my little tip for you guys. I love you all. I love you. Reach out to me. I'm here to help. You got this. Big hugs. Bye-bye.